Hello, everyone. This is JT Keating, Vice President of Product Strategy here at Zimperium. I'd like to welcome you to another webinar from beautiful, well, sort of beautiful, kind of misty Dallas, Texas. We are looking forward to running through this conversation of a coverage of Zimperium from GigaOm and a little conversation about phishing and anti-phishing and all the things that are going to fit into that. So before we dive in, the usual perfunctory conversation. I'll try and keep this to 20-25 minutes worth of content and then Q&A if there is any. If there aren't questions, we're not the type of company to make it up. So we'll just give you some time back at the end of all of that, if that's the case. Please follow us on social media, albeit everybody doesn't need an additional follow on most social medias. Our follows on Twitter, LinkedIn, are really, really excellent sources of information on everything having to do with mobile security. So it's not just a sock puppet corporate thing. It is very much informational and really provides some great value about mobile attacks. And then an archive will be up tomorrow, by tomorrow, and we can also make slides available to folks. And also the report that we are talking about, that we are covered in, you can get a copy of as well. So with that, we are just going to dive straight into this conversation about mobile phishing. First thing, we like to, of course, start this right off the bat and say, hey, look, this is something that is now just becoming common knowledge. For a while, people weren't really thinking this way, but now the simple fact is an endpoint's an endpoint is an endpoint. So if you need to secure your traditional endpoints, you also need to secure your mobile endpoints. And in a typical enterprise, almost 2/3 of all devices now accessing corporate data and corporate assets are actually mobile. So that's great, but the problem is these 60% have almost no visibility unless you have a solution like Zimperium. And the reason that that matters is these new devices are exposing the organization to a brand new set of risks. Some are risks that we're familiar with, like malicious apps and phishing, which we're going to be talking about today. Some of them are, in the realm of things that we thought have gone away, like network attacks, for instance. And one of the realities of these devices is users are the admin. And obviously we're talking about phishing, so users, of course, are going to be the primary folks we're talking about anyway. But any of us folks that have been in security for any period of time know that users are the greatest risks in the organization. And now with mobile devices, they are the admin. There is no central patch management system. They spend 80% of their time outside of protected corporate networks connecting to whatever network they want, hence the network attack as a real issue. They decide what apps they're going to install, all these sorts of things, and then they walk right back into the organization with them. So clearly, there's new risks here. Device compromises are the ultimate end game because that's the way you can actually be persistent, right? But this conversation today is focused on phishing in particular. Zimperium detects all of these, but we're specifically talking about the hot topic, of course, of mobile phishing. If you've seen any of our or attended any of our webinars, you probably have seen this 1-2 punch. But it's a good thing to set up. According to Verizon, 90% of breaches start with a phishing attack. According to multiple sources, almost 2/3 of emails are read on mobile. So that means, by definition, mobile phishing is a huge problem, right? And most traditional corporate anti-phishing solutions are in line in the corporate email. So on the one hand, you're like, okay, maybe we're already protected. Well, clearly we're not already protected if 90% of the breaches are still occurring. Then you've got the reading on mobile. And one of the realities of mobile is that mobile actually makes phishing much easier. And fear not, my friends, I am not going to actually run through every single one of these. Matter of fact, I'm barely going to touch them. This list comes from a mobile phishing white paper that's on our site. That actually talks about the need for machine learning detection of mobile malware. But there's some things that are very obvious. Matter of fact, Verizon recently came out with a mobile security index report, which is another great report to read. and reinforced a lot of these things. The fact is, when you are on mobile, you can't compare screens, for instance. When you're on mobile, the screens are very small and it's much more difficult visually to tell the difference. When you're on mobile, you're also doing things usually click, 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 like texting while distracted, or, we're just used to just moving quickly. And so a lot of these things, just as a for instance, make mobile very easy. And so with 90% of the breaches occurring and 2/3 being read on mobile, that's corporate, right? So it's bad enough with this new list of things that make mobile so much easier as a target from a phishing standpoint. But then the reality is there's a whole new set of vectors on mobile that are outside of the purview of traditional corporate anti-phishing solutions. For instance, personal email, right? And there's some folks, I was with some clients yesterday, customers of ours, and they were talking about, well, one of our policies we use is on our devices, they can't have personal email. Well, every one of these ones that are on here are web-based as well. So unless you're locking down the browser, people can still get to them. So what happens if they're getting phished on their personal side? Well, I mentioned device compromise is the primary objective. You could get phished. It could deliver an exploit to compromise the device. Now, since you've owned the device, you own the personal side and the corporate side. So now the corporation is at risk. What about SMS and messenger apps? We're starting to see a lot of text and messaging, and that's the delivery mechanism instead of traditional email. Again, back to the breach report or the Verizon Security Index, they estimate that 85% of the phishing attacks on mobile are beyond email. So that's pretty interesting. And then there's a whole new category, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We've done full webinars on it, but there are malicious apps like BankBot that, when you really look at it, are forms of phishing, because they are designed to make a user believe they're interacting with a legitimate app, in this case, banking apps. But guess what? BankBot is a misnomer now, because it's hundreds of well-known brands, some of which have nothing to do with banking, right? But it puts an overlay on top of the legitimate one, and you end up directly giving away your credentials. It's a form of phishing. So mobile is the new endpoint, 60% of the endpoints. 90% of breaches occur on or start with phishing. 2/3 of corporate emails are read on mobile. Mobile has all these parameters that make it even easier to pull off a phish. And then, oh, by the way, there's 3 new attack vectors. So this report that GigaOm has recently come out with goes in and talks about what are the key criteria for evaluating phishing solutions. Now, this is not a mobile phishing report. Simon Gibson, by the way, rock star, former CISO for Bloomberg. The guy really knows his stuff, It's actually on phishing overall, right? And we're going to go into the key criteria of how they look and assess various different phishing solutions, and then specifically kind of how they talk about Zimperium. But the key part behind this whole thing is, how do we actually do this? And one part of that report says, there's literally a question, should you implement endpoint anti-phishing technology? And the answer is, sort of it depends. And it says that the logic is that most people want to stop the phishing before it even reaches the endpoint. I think that makes complete sense if you're on a lockdown corporate PC on a lockdown network, right? Yeah, it's not going anywhere. It's not in the hands of, frankly, kind of idiots, right? Mobile, totally different situation. And Simon, I think, would agree with that, because he has now included Zimperium for the last 2 years in this report as the mobile, kind of solution that is in this report, because he likes our innovative approach. And we'll talk about some of the things he has to say here in a second. So one part of this, and again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I think it's really important when you look at the report itself and go through and read it. He breaks them down and says, what are some of the things that are table stakes for an overall anti-phishing solution? What are some of these unique things, which we're going to dive into here in a second? And then what is some game-changing stuff? He kind of considers us one of those game-changing stuffs. only because as things are moving to mobile and as things have these vectors outside of corporate email, you need to start looking at different ways of addressing them. So here are the criteria for anti-phishing solutions. Then by themselves, they seem kind of like you would use for a lot of different things. But I'm going to go into specifics on Zimperium here. He wants to know about the analytics. I mean, how are you actually building your engines? How are you detecting things behaviorally, et cetera? What are my deployment options? Obviously, reporting from a forensic standpoint so we can know what to do. You kind of roll through the list, and we're going to go through each one of them. And these are very important, and you can actually read them in detail in the report. And like I said, I'm going to cycle back to this in a minute. But since what we're going to cycle back to is Zimperium, this is not designed to be an entire product pitch, but you need to understand a little bit about Zimperium's solution before I come back to what Simon and GigaOm said about Zimperium specifically. So first things first, because network attacks are a very real, very heavily used approach to target enterprises. If I'm targeting XYZ company, I'm not going to drop an app in the App Store and pray somebody from XYZ downloads it. What I'm going to do is I'm either going to do mobile phishing, or I'm going to do a network attack where I put up a fake Wi-Fi network right by XYZ, wait till somebody connects it, and then use either of those vectors to compromise the device. Now I'm persistent. Now I own them. Okay. So since the bad guy owns the network the majority of the time, you have to do your detection on device. This has been a fundamental premise of Zimperium from the very beginning. You have to do you do all your machine learning up in the cloud, but then you do your detection down on device. We have one core engine. It's called Z9. There's multiple ways we can roll this out. I'm going to talk about protecting the device. It can also be used to protect apps, but that's outside of the purview of this conversation, because the odds of you being phished at the exact same time you're doing mobile banking, probably not particularly high. So I'm going to keep it focused on how do you protect your employees that are mobile against phishing attacks. So Z9 is trained up in the lab, trained up in the cloud, and does all of its detection on device. And the reason that network on-device detection matters so much is, A, if the bad guy owns the network, he's not going to take you to a cloud to do detection. He's going to turn it off immediately. B, privacy. If you're doing all your detection on device and the only thing you do is, hey, I detected a threat, and you throw some forensics up, you don't have any privacy risks at all, which is critical when it comes to BYOD. It's critical GDPR, it's critical CCPA, throwing out all the alphabet soups, but it's all the privacy stuff that really, really matters, right? There's another benefit of doing all your device detection on device. Your management console can be in any cloud you want, as opposed to locking your management console into the cloud that you had to pick if you're doing cloud-based detection. So there's a host of benefits. So Z9 does all its detection on device, machine learning-based detection, including machine learning-based detection of phishing. The product to protect device is called Zips, and Zips goes through the life cycle that you would need to protect and detect device. We do risk identification. Risks and threats are different in our world. Risk means you are more likely to have an attack succeed, potentially, let's say, out-of-date OSs, apps with security and privacy risks. Those sorts of risks are there. Then there's threat detection. Is there malware on here? Is there a man-in-the-middle attack occurring? In the case of today, is there a mobile phishing attack occurring? Then there's remediation, either directly by us or via MDM, if we're working with the MDM. And then you go out and do reporting. Again, this is not designed, you can grab these slides. We're more than welcome to talk to you anytime about this. Not designed to go much further than this, but there are some fundamental principles that we had that all have to do with the fact that we are the enterprise guys. We've always been the enterprise guys. We've never been in the consumer business. We haven't tried to port consumer business to enterprise. We started from the very beginning and said we want to be enterprise, and we have all these benefits, including things like any cloud, on-prem. We can operate with multiple UEMs simultaneously. So we have all these inherent advantages. So now that you understand on-device machine learning detection, Zips is the product. Specifically when it comes to phishing, there's the engine itself that knows how to basically assess whether or not it is a phishing attack that is occurring. There's two different ways to feed the engine based on your privacy policies, basically. The first one is user initiated. So in this case, with a long press, the user can actually share the URL with zips, and it will determine whether or not it's phishing. The second is an always on option. This one, if you opt for this one, it's an on-device VPN, so it's not going out to the cloud and back. It literally, every URL comes in, it will assess it through the engine. If it's good, it just goes off. If it's bad, you get blocked. And so depending on your use case, from a privacy standpoint and from a forensic standpoint, you use different approaches for different groups. Again, as the enterprise guys, one of the main things that we care most about is group-based policies. We pull groups directly in from the UEMs, and then we can create highly tuned group-based policies. So there might be a group that is BYOD, or maybe it's a group that's in Europe for GDPR, and you say, no, only user initiated, right? On the other hand, it might be a corporate-owned device, and you say, no, we want always-on protection. We want to look at every single URL and determine whether or not it's going to a phishing site. Same core engine of Z9, two different approaches because we believe that there are different groups within organizations to feed it. So with that in mind, on-device, machine learning-based detection, the most enterprise-capable solution, machine learning detection of phishing with multiple ways of getting to it. I'm going to cycle back to a few of the categories, the criteria that GigaOm has. And again, you can read the full report on our site, or we might even be sending it to you. So I apologize, I should have known that in advance. I'm pretty sure we're going to send it to you. What are some of those criteria again? Well, the first one was analytics. And you can see, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but you can see that Simon definitely caught on to the Z9 engine, training in the cloud, and then being able to detect these attacks is a primary advantage. Again, phishing specific in terms of what this report was. Deployment, right? He said we could easily be categorized in the EPP, that's Endpoint Protection Platform. If you actually shift over to Gartner for a minute, Gartner actually has a chart in the most recent buyer's guide for mobile threat defense, which is the category we're in. And it shows EPP and EDR for traditional endpoints equal to MTD on mobile. So very similar to what Simon is saying here. But you can see that it can work on BYOD or managed, right? And that it takes it to the vectors beyond email into things like messaging while providing the ability to deal with user privacy, which has been a thing. Whether it's BYOD or GDPR, the privacy thing is really been huge from our customer standpoint. Next major category was reporting. Not only does he talk about the level of our forensic capability, but he also talks about the fact that we've got an unparalleled set of integrations from enterprise tools. Now, this doesn't even include the SIM products. So it doesn't include the SIM products that we're tied into, like FireEye and Splunk and Alienware and all those. This just happens to be pretty much kind of some of the bigger ones that are recent. McAfee EPO, Workspace ONE Intelligence, and Defender ATP. You could add to that list now Microsoft Sentinel, Azure Sentinel, which we announced last week at RSA. So part of our main thing is we believe that we should fit into the enterprise, not have the enterprise fit into us. So if you have a cloud investment that you've already made that's outside, for instance, of AWS, say it's Azure, you should be able to use that. If you have multiple MDMs, maybe one's for corporate and one's for BYOD, you should be able to use them. If you have multiple, whatever your choice is, as far as EDRs, SIMs, etc., you should be able to use them. We should fit into the pane of glass, in this case, that your guys are already used to dealing with, so you can have a holistic picture of your endpoints and of your users. And we think that's huge because, again, we're enterprise. We are constantly thinking about the enterprise users, not consumers. Broadness. This is one where it points out an obvious, and I agree with it. Since this is not, phishing is not our end all be all. We're not trying to provide phishing protection across every endpoint. So the breadth of our solution compared to the other guys that they put in there, then the other companies he puts in there are the leaders in phishing. That's what they do, right? He's saying, okay, but that's fine for us because we are the ones that actually cover mobile and all the things that happen on mobile that are outside of the traditional platforms. Architecture. He reinforces, again, trained in the cloud, and then it can run down. And he does talk again about the fact that we can run it in different modes. You can either click on it or you can let it run automatically. It depends on your group, depends on your particular strategy. And again, talks about the fact we're the only ones that run completely on device. When it comes to feature sets, he's talking once again about the forensic data and the integrations in with those folks, the multiple MDMs in a single tenant, and the ability to detect across all 4 major vectors: device, network, phishing, malware, because usually there's a kill chain. Usually there's some combination of apps, network, or phishing delivering a compromise to be able to exploit a device, or tricking a user into elevating privileges in order to be able to be above containers. So you need to be able to have that full kill chain, not just one particular part. And then the last couple, pricing model just happens to be the way that they put the category. Straightforward, it is per user. It's actually part of our standard, Zips offering, reinforces our integration in with the other consoles. And then he also highlights the fact that we're the only MTD provider that's currently FedRAMP ATO. And technically, he's correct. We are the only pure MTD provider that is FedRAMP ATO. There is one other MTD provider that is FedRAMP ATO, and that is MobileIron, with MobileIron Threat Defense, and that happens to be our engine inside of the MobileIron agent. So both of the MTD solutions that are FedRAMP ATO are Zimperium-based technology. And then lastly, crowdsourcing / internet reputation. You can see that it's talking about the fact that we get to take advantage of our multi-million platform installs. Numbers not quite that anymore. It's a little bit more than that, but we'll leave it because that's what the report says. And it talks about, again, our whole focus, our core competency is, regardless of the threat, how do we look at the inherent behaviors that we can identify on a closed operating system like mobile to be able to detect these attacks. And we detect it with machine learning based detection of device, network, malicious apps, and phishing. So that's the overall approach. And again, this was designed to kind of run through it kind of quickly and show you kind of some thought process, especially as it comes to, if I'm thinking, okay, mobile is a major endpoint, it's in the hands of people that don't know much about this stuff, spending all the time outside of my purview, having all sorts of new vectors that I can't control. So I need to do some form of anti-phishing on mobile. Otherwise, I'm going to be in deep trouble. What are things to think about? And that's where I think the criteria and the evaluation approach that Simon has put into the report can really, really help you. So I promised you 20 to 25 minutes. It is now 24 minutes after, so I feel kind of good about that. I'm going to stop for a second and then see whether or not there are any questions. And if not, I will give you the rest of your day back and look forward to chatting with any of the rest of you. So I do not see any questions. If you do have any questions, feel free just to shoot me an email directly if that helps. It's jt.keating@zimperium.com. But other than that, I'd like to thank everybody for your time and wish you a very good day. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.